If you think pennies don't matter, you're training for failure. That sentence isn't cruelty, it's a diagnosis. Wealth rarely arrives as a bolt of lightning. It accumulates like water filling a tank through many tiny tubes. Each tube is a small choice. The subscription you forgot to cancel, the $7 lunch you tell yourself is no big deal, the recurring fee that never makes a headline. Left unchecked, those tiny flows become leaks. Over decades, leaks turn a promising reservoir into a dry basin. Channeling the practical, no-nonsense spirit associated with Charlie Munger, this is a simple claim. Avoiding repeated small stupidities matters more than chasing big, dramatic wins. The wealthy tend to be less glamorous at the margins. They are allergic to recurring nonsense. That habit, the discipline to stop the tiny, repeated errors, is one of the clearest, most reliable predictors of who eventually accumulates real, lasting wealth. Picture a single common leak, a $5 coffee you buy every workday. If you buy one every weekday, that's roughly $25 per week. Over a year, it's more than $200. Now imagine the same $25 redirected into investments instead. The money doesn't disappear. It becomes an army of small workers, each compounding and multiplying over time. Compounding, put plainly, is the process where returns generate their own returns. It is indifferent and mechanical. It rewards consistency and punishes procrastination. That $100 a year invested with modest returns becomes the scaffold of a future you. I'll be blunt. Most people underestimate how forgiving compounding can be if fed early and consistently, and how unforgiving it is when you let small expenses erode the base. This is not motivational fluff. It's arithmetic married to psychology. Two forces are at work here, arithmetic and the mind, and they move relentlessly. Understanding both is the key to stopping the leaks and building real traction. If you want more pragmatic thinking like this, subscribe and keep this video where you can find it. It won't cost you much time, but it might change what you do with your pennies. Let's deal with the arithmetic first, because numbers remove excuses. Compounding is simple in concept. You invest a sum, it earns a return, and those returns earn returns in the future. When people hear compound interest, they sometimes picture a magical formula reserved for spreadsheets and nerds. In practice, compounding is a slow, steady process. Over decades, small regular contributions far outperform irregular attempts to time a big score. Here's an illustrative example. Imagine two people, Alex and Jordan. Alex starts investing $200 a month at age 25 and stops contributing at 35. Then Alex leaves the money alone, earning an illustrative average return of 7% annually until age 65. Jordan starts investing $200 a month at age 35 and continues until age 65 with the same illustrative average return of 7% annually. Which one ends up with more money at 65? Intuitively, many assume Jordan will catch up because Jordan invested for 30 years versus Alex's 10. But the math shows something different. Alex, who started early and contributed for only 10 years, ends up with more than Jordan, who invested for 30 years but started later. Why? Because those first 10 years allowed the invested sums to compound for decades. Those early contributions became the core that grew exponentially, while Jordan's later contributions had less time to work. That example is illustrative. I'm not promising precise outcomes, but the pattern is stable, time magnifies decisions. Small regular contributions early produce outsized effects because compounding has a longer runway. Now flip to the destructive side, small expenses and fees. A 1% annual fee may sound insignificant, but over decades, fees compound against you the same way returns compound for you. If your investment returns average 7% and fees take 1% each year, your effective return is 6%. Over many years, that difference is huge. Fee leakage is the silent thief of wealth because it looks tiny every year, but snowballs into major lost opportunity over decades. Another illustrative example, suppose you spend $10 more each week on non-essential purchases that bring no long-term value. That's $520 a year. Invested at a modest illustrative annual return, that money could grow into tens of thousands over 30 or 40 years. Or, conversely, those purchases could be eating away at the principle you could have used to build freedom. The point is not to moralize every choice. The point is to recognize the pattern. Repeated small losses compound into large ones. Arithmetic makes the case for vigilance, but numbers alone don't change behavior. That's where psychology enters, and why the way you treat small sums today predicts how you'll treat large sums tomorrow. Habits are the brain's operating system. Repeated actions create neural pathways that make a behavior easier to repeat in the future. When you tell yourself, it's only $5, and then reach for the impulse buy again and again, you're training a habit, not spending an isolated sum. That habit grows tolerance for waste. It becomes harder to muster the discipline required for larger, more consequential financial decisions, because your brain has been conditioned to accept a pattern of irrationality. Consider two archetypes. The distracted spender makes dozens of trivial decisions every week. A subscription here, a convenience purchase there, the occasional unexamined impulse that is always justified by small rationalizations. The consistent investor establishes simple rules: automatic transfers on payday, a short list of approved discretionary purchases, and quarterly account reviews, and then let systems run. The difference between them is not intelligence. It is habits and systems. The consistent investor automates against human weakness. The distracted spender leaves outcomes to the fickleness of mood. We can break this down into a few predictable patterns that trap otherwise sensible people. First, the "it's only" rationalization. It's only $7. It's just 1 month of this subscription. I'll cancel later. These phrases are the brain rearranging facts to remove the emotional friction of a purchase. In isolation, they're not catastrophic. Repeated hundreds of times a year, they are the foundation of a poor financial character. Inconsistent, reactive, easily swayed. Second, the status trap. Humans are wired to seek social validation. That drive can be harmless, but it becomes expensive when used to buy signals rather than real value. The item that impresses co-workers this month becomes yesterday's chore next month. Status purchases are especially dangerous because they deliver transient gains in esteem but create permanent financial drains. Third, procrastination. I'll start when I earn more. I'll deal with this next year. Procrastination is seductive because it delays pain. But time is the critical ingredient for compounding. The consequences of waiting are not merely the lost months of action. Waiting reduces the multiplier that time provides. The worst procrastination is the kind that compounds. You delay building the habit of saving, and the habit never forms, leading to later excuses and more delays. Fourth, subscription creep. Small monthly charges are designed to be invisible. A $6 music service, a $9 streaming plan, a $12 fitness app. Each one feels manageable, and each one is easy to keep because the payment is out of sight, out of immediate pain. Over a year, a handful of these add up to real money. Worse, they create the behavioral pattern of tolerating recurring charges without review. Fifth, fee blindness. Banks, apps, brokerages, and service providers all make money from small recurring fees. When you ignore these fees, you tacitly agree to transfer real value away from yourself. Fee blindness is not ignorance of a single cost. It is a habit of not checking the terms and thus becoming a passive payer in a system rigged to extract ongoing revenue from inattention. These psychological patterns deepen the arithmetic problem. Small expenses aren't just small numbers. They are training events. Each decision to tolerate a leak trains your future self to tolerate bigger leaks. And once you train that tolerance into habit, fundamental changes become far harder. So what does it mean to be allergic to stupidity? The phrase that captures the behavior we want to cultivate. It is not rigid austerity or obsessive penny pinching. It's a posture of constant attention to recurring losses and a willingness to adopt simple rules to eliminate them. It is a practical, almost clinical disposition. If something causes repeated, predictable loss, stop it, automate against it, or fix it. Here are a few micro examples that illustrate the principle in real life. Example 1, the recurring subscription you forgot. You signed up for a 30-day free trial and forgot to cancel. For the next year, a charge appears that you barely notice. Multiply that by several forgotten trials and monthly services, and you've got a leakage that could have been redirected into investments or savings. The fix here is mundane. Do a quarterly pass through your bank statement and subscriptions, cancel what you don't use, and put the equivalent amount into an automatic transfer the day after your payday. Example 2, the $10 lunch that becomes $50 in purchases over time. It's not the occasional splurge that kills progress, it's frequency. If a discretionary purchase occurs daily or even several times a week, its cumulative effect is enormous. A simple purpose test reorients the decision. Ask what job this money is doing. Is it fueling career energy, social bonds, or health? Or is it momentary satisfaction? If it's the latter, consider delaying or finding a cheaper ritual that fulfills the same underlying need. Example 3, small fees in an account. Sometimes the account maintenance fee is under $10 a month, and you rationalize it as the price for convenience. But convenience paid every month compounds into a serious long-term expense. The antidote is a structural one. Consolidate accounts, eliminate redundant services, and set alerts to track where fees come from. The occasional friction of switching providers is worth the long-term savings. These examples point to a broader truth. Systems beat motivation. Motivation is fragile. It spikes and crashes with emotions. Systems, automatic transfers, scheduled reviews, default rules, operate independent of mood. If your good intentions rely on your future self remembering a spreadsheet or feeling determined on a given day, you're not building a system. You're hoping for heroism. Now consider identity. The way you treat small dollars today shapes who you become. When you automate a $100 monthly investment, you're telling yourself, I am someone who invests on payday. That identity statement repeated becomes automatic. Conversely, when you repeatedly spend impulsively, you reinforce a different identity. I am someone who spends in the moment. Identity is not a philosophical abstraction. It is neuroscience. Every repeated action strengthens a neural pathway. Over time, that pathway is the difference between a disciplined steward and an unmoored spender. This is where the moral dimension enters the conversation. But be careful. Moralizing rarely helps. The goal is not to shame. The goal is to point out that character is formed by repeated small acts, and financial character matters because money amplifies choices. Being proud of a single large investment is hollow if you were careless with small sums for decades. Conversely, the patient person who builds practices around small, consistent, smart decisions will be prepared when genuine opportunities arise. We should also be clear about what we are not saying. This is not a counsel to live in penury or to deny worthwhile spending that enhances life. It is a counsel to be intentional about recurring expenditures that do not deliver proportional ongoing value. The test is pragmatic. Does this purchase or recurring charge improve my life in a way that justifies its cost when stacked month after month? If not, treat it as a leak. Let's interrogate a few standard excuses more directly, because they show up in almost every conversation about money. Excuse: I'll start when I earn more. Counter: you don't need a huge income to make compounding work. You need consistency and time. Increasing income helps, but it's orthogonal to the habit of saving or investing. Worse, higher income often increases the scale of leakage through lifestyle inflation. The sooner you lock in disciplined habits, the better you will handle income increases responsibly. Excuse: I'm waiting for the right moment taught the big opportunity. Counter: waiting for the perfect opportunity is a strategy of inaction. The market doesn't reward perfect timing as much as it rewards patience and presence. Small, regular contributions reduce the risk of timing mistakes and keep you invested while the world does the dirty work of creating returns. Excuse: it's only a small fee. It won't matter. Counter: small fees matter because they compound. Repeatedly tolerating small fees is equivalent to setting a lower long-term baseline for your returns. Think in years, not in moments. Excuse: I don't want to live like a monk. Counter: no one is asking that. The point is to prioritize recurring choices that build long-term optionality, while allowing occasional joyful spending that enhances life and relationships. The difference is intentionality versus compulsion. If you're still skeptical, if you think this is moralizing or trying to make you feel guilty, ask whether your current behaviors are creating the future you want. If your habits were to persist unchanged for a decade, where would you be? If that image fails to inspire, then habit change is not about sacrifice. It's about alignment. At this point, you understand the brutal arithmetic and the mind's complicity. The next step is to convert that insight into action. But before we get there, it's worth pausing on two mental models that can sharpen how you approach daily decisions. First, inversion. Instead of asking, how can I get rich? Ask, what are the things that will definitely ruin my chances? That list will be shorter and easier to execute against. Recurring leaks, large debt, lack of automation, and patterns of procrastination. Avoiding those negative drivers is often more powerful than chasing a single brilliant investment. Second, the margin of safety applied to lifestyle. The idea is straightforward. Preserve flexibility by keeping recurring obligations and living standards modest relative to your means. The margin protects you from shocks and prevents the need to reverse course under duress. People who live at the edge of their means are perpetually vulnerable. People who maintain a reasonable margin build resilience. A third related mental model is to treat money as workers. When you save and invest, you're hiring an army of small workers. Each dollar is a worker you set to work procuring more dollars. When you spend impulsively, you're firing those workers for the sake of a temporary emotional spike. That metaphor reframes spending as a managerial decision. Which workers do you want active and why? All of this leads to a practical realization. The path to fewer leaks is not Herculean. It is a series of small, repeatable acts amplified by systems. That insight is a relief. You don't need a grand overhaul overnight. You need a handful of repeatable corrections and a bit of automation. By now, the tension should be clear. The arithmetic rewards discipline with exponential returns. Psychology and habit formation make it easy either to build that discipline or to erode it. The critical question is, which habits will you train? You might be thinking, fine, I get it. Stop the leaks, start small, but where do I begin? That is the natural next question. Before answering it with a checklist, let me set up one more vital perspective that often gets overlooked. The practice hypothesis. Practice hypothesis. Small investments are practice for managing larger sums. When you consistently make small, deliberate financial moves, schedule contributions, resist impulse buys, review recurring charges, you're not just saving small sums. You're developing capability. Capability matters. When you eventually face bigger opportunities or larger responsibilities, you will either have the practice discipline to handle them or you will not. The person who habitually tolerates leaks will mishandle larger sums because those same reflexes persist at scale. This explains why many lottery winners and sudden inheritors lose their windfalls. The money surfaces a lack of practiced restraint, not a failure of math. Conversely, someone who has practiced discipline with small sums will likely steward larger sums far better because their choices are habituated. Think about training for a sport. You don't start in the playoffs, you practice fundamentals repeatedly. Financial competence is the same. Small, consistent acts are the fundamentals of stewardship. We are now approaching the practical horizon. How to build systems that automate the right behaviors and stop leaks without requiring heroic motivation. But before prescribing tactics, I want to underline a psychological truth. The first acts are the hardest because they break existing neural grooves. If you want different habits, change your environment and the default rules that your future self will inherit. Systems, automatic transfers, rules for discretionary spending, scheduled reviews are the scaffolding for lasting change. At the risk of being mundane, here are the principles that will guide those systems when we build them. 1. Detect recurring drains. 2. Make the desirable action default. 3. Reduce friction for saving and increase friction for wasteful spending. 4. Name purposes for accounts so money has a job. 5. Build small wins and celebrate them to cement identity. I will give concrete steps in a moment, but think of these principles as axioms. They're not revolutionary because they don't need to be. The point is execution, not novelty. Finally, for this section, consider the emotional payoff. Discipline is anticlimactic in the short term. It often looks like missed pleasure. But over time, discipline converts into freedom. Freedom to choose jobs you like because you aren't trapped by living expenses. Freedom to take smart risks because you have reserves. Freedom to give and support those you care about. That's the real reward of plugging the leaks, not some abstract number on a statement, but the growth of options and peace that money managed well can provide. Now pause and reflect. You've seen the arithmetic that magnifies consistent choices. You've seen the psychology that trains tolerance for loss or discipline for gain. You've looked at the mental models that change perspective. The logical next step is to move from insight to structure, to run an audit, to set up automations, to select a handful of defensive rules that prevent leaks by default. But before handing you a checklist or a set of scripts to follow, there's one more obstacle to confront. The sentimental attachments and mental stories that sneak into financial decisions. People anchor to narratives. I earned this, I deserve this, or I worked hard, I'll reward myself. Those narratives are not necessarily wrong. The danger is when they become unexamined justifications for recurring drain. Distinguishing deserved reward from habitual leakage requires honest accounting. An honest accountant begins with curiosity, not shame. Open your bank app and ask, with kindness and candor, what patterns do I see? Which small costs recur? Which ones reflect real value? Which are mindless? That question is the doorway. It's not dramatic. It's not glamorous. But it is the beginning of training a new identity. The person who does not tolerate recurring stupidity. At this point, you might be ready to act, but you could also feel resistance. That resistance is normal. Change triggers friction because habits confer short-term cognitive comfort. Overcoming that friction is why systems matter. They lower the need for heroic motivation. We will build those systems step by step. We will check for subscription leaks, automate transfers that pay yourself first, create rules that add friction to impulse purchases, and rename accounts so money has a job. But before we lock into a checklist, there's one more concept to solidify: the difference between headline optimizations and durable corrections. Headline optimizations are flashy: a viral investment tip, a new app with a bold promise, or a single bargain that feels clever. Durable corrections are boring: reducing recurring fees, automating contributions, canceling unused subscriptions. The wealthy favor durable corrections because they change the baseline of daily life. The headline optimizers can produce short-term wins, but rarely shift long-term trajectories if daily leaks persist. So ask yourself, are you pursuing headline optimizers or durable corrections? If you want to build durable wealth, prioritize the latter. That will shape the checklist we'll work through next. Simple, actionable, repeatable steps you can do in the next 24 to 72 hours to stop leaks and start building the identity of a disciplined steward. We're on the edge of shifting from diagnosis to prescription. You've got the why, arithmetic and psychology, and the mental tools: inversion, margin of safety, money as workers. The next moves are concrete: an audit, a set of default automations, and a few rules that prevent relapse. Those steps are straightforward, but they require the willingness to make small changes now so compounding can work in your favor later. Before we proceed to the practical checklist, take a moment to catalog 3 things. 1 recurring charge you suspect you're tolerating, 1 impulsive spending habit you want to curb, and 1 small amount you could start automating into savings tomorrow. Write them down. Naming them removes the abstraction and creates a target. That tiny act of naming is already a practice. You're training the habit of noticing leaks. Now you have clarity on the problem and a rough map of the solution. Stop recurring leaks, automate the right flows, and build identity through repeatable acts. The rest is engineering. But engineering requires discipline applied to small things repeatedly. That is the paradox. To handle big money, you must practice on small money. We will next move into a concrete tactical plan to execute that engineering. You'll get a step-by-step audit method, simple automation scripts, rules for discretionary spending, and behavioral tweaks that make saving easier than spending. You'll also get a short checklist you can complete within 48 hours to begin the transformation and make compounding start working on your side rather than against you. Before we get into the nuts and bolts of the checklist, there is one final motivational note worth emphasizing. Discipline compounds emotionally as well as financially. Each time you prevent a small leak, you strengthen the muscle of restraint and grow your confidence that you can manage larger choices. The first 10 corrected leaks are disproportionately valuable because they shift identity and build momentum. So far, we've framed the problem, shown the arithmetic, explored the psychology, exposed common traps and mental models, and set the stage for action. The next section will be surgical: how to audit your finances, how to set up systems that run on autopilot, and which small rules will deliver the largest long-term effect with the least daily sacrifice. Those are the mechanics that turn insight into results. Here's a surgical plan you can execute in the next few days. Step-by-step actions, simple rules to adopt, and behavioral changes that lock in the right defaults. These are engineered to stop leaks fast and to make disciplined choices the path of least resistance for your future self. Start with a focused audit. Open your banking app or website and look back 3 months of transactions. Don't skim. Scroll line by line. Make 3 lists as you go. Recurring charges, small frequent purchases, and one-off impulse purchases that feel like patterns when you look at them collectively. For each recurring charge, ask 2 questions. Do I actively use this every month? And does the value justify a long-term commitment? If the answer to either is no, mark it for cancellation. For small frequent purchases, coffee, app extras, convenience fees, estimate a weekly average and multiply by 50 to get a conservative annual figure. Seeing the annual number reframes the decision. What looks trivial in the moment suddenly becomes substantial on a yearly statement. Next, cancel the obvious leaks. Schedule time today, 30 to 60 minutes, to remove what you don't use. Cancel forgotten trials, downgrade plans you don't need, and unsubscribe from services you rarely open. If a vendor makes cancellation difficult, consider flagging the charge with your bank to stop future payments while you pursue closure. Treat resistance as a red flag. Don't let inertia be the default. That 30 to 60-minute investment now buys you recurring algebra-free savings for years. Automate saving immediately after the cancellations. The principle is simple. Make saving the default and spending the exception. Create a standing transfer that moves a fixed amount from your checking to a savings or investment account the day after payday. If you can't commit to a large sum, start with an amount you can reliably sustain. Even $25 or $50 per paycheck makes a difference. Label the receiving account with a purpose: house fund, retirement practice, opportunity cash. Naming accounts matters because the human brain treats labeled money differently than amorphous balances. When you see vacation or emergency, you mentally protect it. When you see savings, you often treat it like free-floating cash. Now, apply friction where impulse lives. Remove stored cards from online retailers and delete payment apps you use for impulse purchases. Every time you increase friction for a non-essential purchase, you give your rational brain a chance to intervene. Add a 24-hour rule for non-essential buys over a set amount you choose. The 24-hour rule creates a cooling-off period in which emotion dissipates and reason often prevails. Couple the cooling period with a purpose test. Before you buy, answer, "What job will this money do for me 3 months from now?" If you can't give a clear value-based answer, pause. Introduce a simple pay yourself first rule. On payday, your first outgoing transfers should be to yourself. Automate them so they don't depend on willpower. If direct automation to an investment vehicle isn't an immediate option, route the funds to a dedicated savings account as the first transaction. Over time, move the money into longer-term accounts when convenient. The operational detail matters less than the default. Make saving automatic. Create a recurring, scheduled financial review. Mark 1 hour on your calendar every 90 days and treat it like a professional meeting with yourself. Agenda. Verify automatic transfers. Review recurring charges. Check for new fees and tally the year-to-date savings rate. Ask, what leaks reappeared? And what tiny habit could I automate next? Quarterly reviews are a frequency that's frequent enough to catch problems and infrequent enough to avoid fatigue. During these reviews, you won't obsess over daily balances. You'll manage the system that governs them. If you live with a partner, run a brief, honest conversation about defaults. Say something direct and practical. I want us to automate X monthly to our joint rainy day account, and then create a wide discretionary pool per month for fun things. That way, we spend from a contained budget and stop recurring surprises. Framing savings as a shared default reduces friction and aligns incentives. But if you're single, treat yourself like a partner you can trust. Commit publicly to 1 or 2 friends about the steps you'll take. Accountability matters because habit change is social as well as personal. Use the inversion test regularly. At your quarterly review, ask, what would most likely ruin our wealth in 5 to 10 years? The list is usually short: recurring fees, lifestyle inflation, insufficient automation, and lack of emergency reserves. Pick the top item and make a single measurable change that neutralizes it. Small, consistent eliminations of the worst risks compound faster than sporadic attempts to capture big returns. Let's walk through concrete microscripts and rules you can adopt immediately. These are templates. Adapt the language to your life. Cancellation script, email or chat with provider. Hello, I'd like to cancel my subscription to service. Please confirm the cancellation and the date of my last charge. If there's a prorated refund available, please apply it to my account. Thanks. Short, direct, and without apology. You don't need to conjure excuses. Purpose test script in your head before a purchase. What job will this purchase do for me in 90 days? If the main answer isn't clearly related to health, lasting relationships, or sustained productivity, pause. Partner conversation starter. I'm planning a 90-day financial reset to eliminate recurring leaks and automate savings. Can we pick 1 hour this week to align our monthly subscriptions and decide on a single discretionary budget? Framing matters. Replace "I'm cutting back" with "I'm optimizing where my money is doing work." Language that treats money as productive changes how you feel when you protect it. Now some illustrative arithmetic that drives urgency. These are conservative illustrative examples, not guarantees, but they show the scale of the effect. Illustrative example A. Imagine you stop a $10 weekly leak, a lunch, a convenience purchase, an app upgrade. That saves $520 a year. If you route that $520 into a modest growth vehicle and allow it to compound at an illustrative 6% per year for 30 years, the result is in the low tens of thousands. It's not a windfall, but it is a materially different future than spending the money year after year. The point is this: small weekly habits, when redirected, become a steady source of capital over time. Illustrative example B. Fees matter. Suppose a portfolio earns an average illustrative return of 7% and you pay 1% in annual fees. Over decades, the difference between 7% and 6% is not a rounding error. It becomes a significant drag on final accumulation. If you think of fees as recurring leaks, you'll start to notice how even a seemingly small percentage removed from returns is equivalent to subtracting a dependable, growing worker from your team every year. These examples are arithmetic with a psychological edge. Numbers show the benefit, but identity ensures you get there. That's why the behavioral scaffolding matters as much as the math. Consider a few defensive rules you can adopt and never break. These are deliberately rigid because defaults win. Rule 1. Review subscriptions quarterly. If you can't justify a recurring charge in the moment of review, cancel it. Rule 2. Automate at least one savings transfer per paycheck into an account you label with a purpose. Over time, increase the amount in tiny increments once it's habitual. Rule 3. For every new recurring payment you add, schedule a cancellation reminder in your calendar for the next billing date. If you decide you still want it, renew. If you forget to schedule cancellation, the default stays to pay. Rule 4. Increase friction for impulse purchases by removing saved cards from mobile apps and turning off one-click payments. Make the decision require a conscious action. Rule 5. When you get a raise or windfall, increase automation first before lifestyle. Temporarily route a portion of the raise into your automated savings for the first 3 months. If you then want to increase spending, you can make a conscious choice. Otherwise, the default saved increase becomes your new standard. These rules replace heroic willpower with architecture. They are less about moralizing choices and more about structuring your environment. So the rational option is also the simplest one. Now, practical tactics that require little weekly discipline but pay off exponentially. Audit subscriptions using 3 buckets: keep, downgrade, cancel. For each subscription, estimate the annual cost and mentally convert it to a monthly or weekly figure you can visualize. Ask whether the service genuinely improves your life enough to justify that recurring cost. If the service is for occasional use, downgrade to the cheapest plan or switch to a pay-as-you-go option. The psychological gain of a cheaper recurring option often beats the hedonistic impulse to keep the top-tier package. Consolidate accounts wherever possible. Multiple small accounts can hide fees and complicate monitoring. Use as few checking and credit accounts as you can manage responsibly. Fewer accounts equal fewer places for hidden charges and fewer narratives to rationalize minor spending. Renegotiate fees periodically. If you have valid standing with service providers, ask for lower rates on essentials you plan to keep. This is not about hacky tactics, it's about applying attention where value is eaten away. A disciplined, polite call to your provider can yield lower fees and simpler plans. Rename savings accounts concretely. Roof repair fund, opportunity cash, 3-month buffer. The brain protects a labeled bucket differently. When you see opportunity cash, you start to view incoming transfers as hiring net positive workers rather than money you can spend without thought. Practice spend ahead budgeting. If you know you have quarterly expenses, insurance, subscriptions billed annually, property taxes, create a small monthly transfer that accumulates the needed sum, so annual bills don't become shocks that force bad decisions. Smoothness beats volatility when you're building habit. Apply the one-card rule for discretionary spending. Put all non-essential purchases on one card, set a monthly cap, and monitor that card weekly. The visual constraint of a single tally prevents scattershot leakage across multiple instruments that makes tracking hard. Leverage social friction to sustain change. Tell someone you trust what you plan to do and when you will do it. Public commitment increases the cost of backsliding. If you're comfortable, create a small accountability bet. Agree to donate a small amount to a cause you don't like if you fail to complete a monthly review. Loss aversion is a powerful motivator. Address common psychological pushbacks and how to respond to them. When you hear yourself say, "I deserve a reward," pause and reframe. Do I deserve a reward that also preserves my future options? If the answer is yes, schedule the reward as part of your plan so it's deliberate. When you're tempted to say, "I'll start next month," convert that statement into a tiny, immediate action. Set a $1 transfer today. Action builds identity. When you say, "I'm too busy," reframe, "This will take 30 minutes today to set up and then less than 10 minutes a quarter to maintain." The friction argument collapses when you quantify the actual time cost. If you're worried about missing out on experiences, adopt a saver budgeting approach. Allocate a modest monthly amount specifically for experiences you value. When that pool is exhausted, wait until the next period. This preserves joy while protecting the consistent savings habit. Let's examine a few realistic scenarios and the practical moves that transition someone from leakage to control. Scenario: the subscription-laden household. Solution: 2-hour deep clean session. One person lists every recurring charge, the other runs through shared accounts to ensure nothing doubles up. Cancel duplicate services, introduce a shared family entertainment budget that centralizes discretionary streaming and makes ongoing choices visible and explicit. Scenario: the frequent small purchases consumer. Solution: the 24-hour rule plus intentional rituals. Replace a $5 habitual purchase with a cheaper ritual that serves the same emotional need. Brew coffee at home. Join a community group for social engagement rather than buying social status items. or schedule a weekly treat rather than daily small spending. Scenario: the fee-blind investor. Solution: compare total expense ratios and platform fees in a single view. If fees are opaque, ask for a consolidated fee statement or estimate. If a fee is unavoidable, calculate its annualized effect and set a target to offset it with reduced leaks elsewhere. Practical scripts for negotiating behavior in the moment. When you feel the urge to buy, ask yourself 5 quick questions. Is this a need or a want? Will this improve my life in 90 days? Is there a cheaper way to get the same result? Can I afford this while maintaining my automated transfer? Can I delay and reevaluate tomorrow? If you answer no to more than 2, don't buy. Now, a step-by-step 48 72-hour plan you can complete with minimal tools. Day 1. First 24 hours. Spend 30 to 60 minutes doing a transaction review for the last 3 months. Identify and list recurring charges, small frequent purchases, and impulse patterns. Cancel or downgrade at least 2 recurring subscriptions that don't pass the value test. Immediately schedule a transfer equal to the combined monthly savings into a labeled savings account the next payday. Set up a single automated transfer, pay yourself first, to move a sustainable amount into a savings or investment account on payday. Remove saved payment methods from 1 or 2 frequently visited merchants to add friction. Day 2, 24-48 hours. Rename a savings account with a clear purpose and set a visible goal. Even pick a target number if you want. It's motivating. Set a calendar reminder for a 90-day financial review and block the time now. Tell one friend or partner about the steps you took and ask them to check in on your progress in 30 days. Implement the 24-hour rule for non-essential purchases over a chosen threshold. Day 3, 48-72 hours. Do a mini-fee check. Look at your statements to identify any recurring bank or account fees. If you find one, commit to a plan to remove or reduce it during your quarterly review. Create a one-card rule for discretionary spending, or, if you prefer digital, set a discrete envelope in your budgeting tool for non-essential purchases. Celebrate the wins. Acknowledge that you canceled subscriptions and set automation. Small celebrations reinforce identity change. If you complete these steps, you'll have removed immediate leaks, created new default behaviors, and set up the scaffolding for habit reinforcement. Over the next 90 days, increase your automated transfer by a token amount if the new pattern feels sustainable. Even a $5 or $10 bump matters for identity formation. Now, a brief discussion of how to scale these practices to greater complexity without losing the central discipline. Once the basics are in place, treat larger financial moves as scaled versions of the same habits. When considering bigger commitments, a mortgage, business investment, or concentrated position, ask whether your habit infrastructure can handle the increased responsibility. If you have automated savings, regular financial reviews, and a disciplined approach to small decisions, you'll be far better equipped to make larger, rational choices. Conversely, without those habits, large sums magnify small flaws. The path to better stewardship of large money is paved with excellent management of small money. There will be setbacks. You'll forget a cancellation. You'll miss a scheduled transfer. You'll slip into a pattern of impulse spending. Expect that and treat each setback as data, not destiny. When you fail, diagnose without drama. What environmental factor allowed the leak? Did you leave a card saved? Were you stressed and seeking an emotional lift? Fix the environment and try again. Repetition without shame is the method of mastery. A few final behavioral nudges to cement change over years, not days. Celebrate milestones in a way that doesn't trigger leaks. After 3 months of consistent automated saving, schedule a low-cost, high-meaning reward. A hike with friends, a homemade celebratory meal, or a small donation to a cause you love. Link the reward to process, not to money amount. The goal is to associate disciplined behavior with positive emotion. Teach someone else. The best way to deepen your own habit is to explain it to another person. Walk a friend through the 3-step audit. Make the act of coaching someone else part of your quarterly review. Teaching externalizes your discipline and makes it more stable. Record a 1-line identity statement and put it where you will see it. Something like, I am someone who protects the future by stopping leaks today. Read it once a week. Short phrases reorient behavior because they serve as cognitive anchors when temptation arrives. Keep the right perspective on lifestyle inflation. When your income rises, see the raise as a test. Increase automation first, then evaluate lifestyle upgrades consciously. This small procedural change prevents stealth leakage and preserves optionality. Before we close, let's handle a few frequently voiced doubts that sabotage action. Doubt, I don't have enough to matter. Response, start anyway. The habit of starting, even with a trivial amount, compounds identity. A $25 monthly transfer is not about the money only. It's about training the automatic process. Over time, you can scale. The alternative is waiting for an amount you never seem to have. Doubt, I'll miss out on life if I stop spending. Response, intention beats compulsion. Build a discretionary envelope for the experiences you value and spend from that pool intentionally. You'll likely find more satisfaction in a planned experience than in a string of impulse purchases. Doubt, this feels obsessive. Response, that's a fear masked as freedom. Obsession is replacing one poor default with another. Discipline is structuring defaults so joyful. Spending is a choice, not a default. You'll know you've crossed into obsession when you start denying small, meaningful pleasures arbitrarily. The test is whether your rules serve flourishing, not deprivation. Doubt, I'm bad with money. Habits won't fix me. Response, habits don't demand perfection. They demand repeatable architecture. People who were bad with money often just lacked systems. Build the simplest system you can sustain and let time compound the behavioral returns. As we approach the finish line, remember the core truth that began this conversation. The money you ignore today trains the person you'll be tomorrow. The micro decisions, the subscription you never use, the coffee you buy every morning without thinking, the fee you tolerate, are practice events that sculpt the neural pathways of your financial character. You are not training to be perfect. You are training to be predictable in the right direction. So act now. Run the audit. Cancel at least 2 subscriptions, set 1 automatic transfer, and block a 90-day review on your calendar. Those 4 acts, executed in the next 3 days, will change your default behaviors. They will also give compounding something to work with. A steady, reliable input of capital, and the psychological infrastructure that keeps it growing. If this message resonated, please subscribe and share it with someone who tolerates small financial leaks they haven't yet noticed. If you want a short downloadable checklist to guide your 48, 72-hour audit, look in the description below. Use it as a script in your first session. Discipline compounds.